makes so much sense because of grammar of graphics. Now that makes sense. Okay, so this is meant to be a two-part sort of thing, but I've kind of just got in my notes here, everything, and it's however far we get through it, we get through it. We have another session in the new year to do more on this. So how fast or slow we go is dependent on everyone. It's fine. There's no rush. So if we do get stuck or something gets stuck, just flag it. And everyone online can just sit and wait while we troubleshoot it here. Yeah. So, yeah. So the whole session today is publication ready plots, and really that's just using ggplot2. What's his error? Already? So have you installed the tidyverse? All right, so first thing we're going to do is set up. If you don't have tidyverse, you're silly, first of all. So you actually don't, you probably just need ggplot for this, but I just, tidyverse. We might end up doing some other stuff in here, so it's probably worthwhile just installing the tidyverse and then loading it. And then the gapminder data set, which Kevin mentioned to have ready to go. If you don't, it's actually a package and you can install it, load it, and then you can say data it, and then it shows up in your environment. Everyone here got it? That's right. All right. Just to remind ourselves of what the yeah, that's right. So click on it. You're good to go. Yeah, and so if we look at the gapminder data set, just to remind ourselves, so a lot of today really is taking different variables from this data set and plotting them. And Kat, you asked about this before, more so with analysis, but you can have, a particular data frame with many variables and just select what you want to plot or analyze. And that's what we'll be doing today. So just to remind ourselves, there's country, continent, year, life expectancy, population, and GDP per capita. There's a few other ways we can interrogate the file if you want to see it in more depth. Just look at the entire data set. So we can see it's pretty big with 1,700 rows, 6 total columns. The ggplot can handle it. Pretty powerful. So as Wytamma alluded to, the GG in ggplot, we think, stands for grammar of graphics, which is this concept that any plot can be expressed from the same set of components. Get this all across. So that's a data set, a coordinate system, and a set of GMs. And GMs are really, the style of plot, right? And the way to think about this is that how ggplot works is that it's essentially a set of layers that you build up from this sort of blank canvas. And I'll demonstrate that now. Oh. So the first thing we have is this ggplot function. And this is a global function. And so any argument or other function that you put within this function is applied to the entire plot. And it's the first layer.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it's called ggplot2, but then any code is ggplot. I get confused.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess ggplot2 is just the version. Yeah, I don't think there's anything more to it than that.
Okay. Yeah. So just drop the 2.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that were different. And I was like,
yeah. You're right, Max? Okay. I'll keep going. So this, like I said, so this is the first layer of any sort of plot is we use this ggplot function. And even though there is nothing in there, we still see that we get this sort of base layer, this sort of gray nothing. And then we can start to build it up. So the first argument will be our gapminder data set. And when we run this, again, nothing comes up. And that's because we haven't told it, the coordinate system or the GMs that we want to use. And so it's just sort of building up this layer. So we have this data set that we want to work with. And now we got to give it the coordinate system. So to do that, we say what we want to map to the plot, right? So mapping equals the aesthetic, AES, aesthetic. And then we want to give it the X and Y axis. So what variables we want to put on this. And I have here GDP versus life expectancy. And I can't remember how they've written them. So I'm going to. I'm just getting the call names down here. And so, you know, for the tibble, you can write call names, gapminder, and it will tell us what the variable names are. And so these are the names that we're going to put in the aesthetic. So we can plot different variables. Yeah. And so we're going to plot GDP per capita on the x-axis, and on the y, the life expectancy. We do not. And we can run that again. And we can see now we have this coordinate system, right? So we have our x-axis and we have all our values and ticks. And ggplot is pretty smart and it automates a lot of this, so we don't need to define the values. Down the line, we can go over how to change these, but we won't do that today. So the last thing we need to do now, so we have our data, we have our coordinate system. The last thing is to add our geome, so the style of plot we want to use. And to do that, to add this extra layer, plus, and then geome, and you'll see when you write geome that a whole heap of options come up. And there are a lot here. We're not going to go through them all today. In fact, I think we're only going to use 2. But in your own time, I do recommend taking a data set like Gapminder, or if you're a bit of a nerd like me, there's a Star Wars data set, I think, in the Tidyverse, and you can just play around with that and just try out different plots. And obviously different plots are specific to different data types as well. And so it's a good idea just to go through those. What's it good at? In what sense?
You said this is Star Wars.
It's just fun. It's
So it's a type of graph.
I think everyone's muted, but everyone is agreeing with me that the Star Wars data set is a fun data set to play with.
We do that.
Oh, well, no, because I'm just so we can run this now. And voila, we have this plot that is not quite ready for publication, but you know, it's getting there. Start, oh, no way. I forgot, I lost my train of thought. Thanks, Legana. Just thrown off by Star Trek. So yeah, we have this plot and we can see life expectancy versus GDP per capita. And yeah, I don't have anything else on that, right? Later on, I'll show you how we can modify this a little bit to make it a bit more interpretable. But throughout this little workshop, there's going to be several challenges, okay? So this first challenge, does everyone have that plot, first of all? Cool. So if you have that plot, essentially you can copy and paste it below, or you can just keep the same plot if you like. And I want you to modify this example so that the figure shows life expectancy, or how life expectancy has changed over time, right? So you can think about what variables are in the data set and how you can manipulate this plot, change it, so that it's showing life expectancy over time instead of life expectancy versus GDP per capita. Yeah. How's everyone in the room going? Assuming everyone got there? Oh. That was just a trick, everyone. Yeah, geez. That was just to show everyone that we all make mistakes and that you shouldn't feel shit about yourself if you make mistakes. So here we have life expectancy versus year. Each of these points represents the life expectancy in that year for a particular country. And so we can't really derive a lot of meaning from this plot, right? But what we can do is change the style of plot, like I was saying before, you know, with different variables or different combinations of variables, it can make sense to try different plots and see what works, or what may be the best way to represent that data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to change this to a line. So change the geome line, which comes up there, and we're going to have a look at that. And that looks, oh, that looks shit. All right, to be honest, that doesn't show us really what we want to see. If you want to search as well, this will tell us essentially why it looks the way it looks. So it's going to tell us why, or what geome line is doing. And it for some reason gave me the geome path, but anyway, I guess it's a derivative. Anyway, so it connects the observations in the order in which they appear in the data. So I'm assuming that it connects all the data points as opposed to, you know, particular data points, which makes sense. But what we can do is modify this a little bit. So instead of having all points connected, we're just going to connect the points that are for a specific country, right? So I was saying before, each of these points represents, the life expectancy in a particular country. That's why there's so many points. And so what we can do is add another argument to the aesthetic. Right? Sorry, just hang 10, everyone. Someone's confused. Wow. I would probably just shut it and start again. Well. Yeah, you can't even restart the session. I would just like to shut it down. I don't know what you did.
I didn't do anything.
Like just force shut the Ask video as opposed to shutting down the computer. There you go. It's handy from Kevin. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an argument here so that we're plotting year against life expectancy, but for each country or by each country. Every country is one of our variables. And what you'll see is, a relatively still ugly plot, but every line here represents a different country. And so we can get a better idea about what's occurring, right? Maybe you can better see the relationship. But obviously we still can't derive that much information from this. And there is another argument we can apply, which is color. So we can color by particular variable. We could color by country, but as each line here represents a different country, that makes the legend will be huge, and we still won't be able to, it'd be hard to differentiate between different things. So what we're going to do instead is color by continent. And so we can just copy and paste that again. Is yours coming up?
Like heaps of R programs popping up.
Yeah, okay.
And then I went to close and said, like, do you want to shuttle 22? I don't know if I opened up R 22 times.
It sounds like you might have. It sounds really weird. But we can catch you up once we get back in. So what we can do, we can add this other argument, color. Continent. We run that. Wow, we have a really pretty plot that we could publish somewhat. So here we have sort of like a better idea of what's happening within each continent across different countries, just by applying this extra argument. All right. So we're going to have multiple arguments, as you can see, X, Y, by country and color. But we can also have multiple GMs. So although I moved the GM point before, we can actually add it back. And sometimes, I don't think in this case, but sometimes it makes sense to add multiple GMs and it gives you a better representation, understanding of the data. I don't know what. I try opening, not that, just try opening like a blank slate R or a different project, and then we can catch you up. So yeah, so now we can see we have GM point in there as well. It's also applied, for those with a keen eye, this color variable to all the GMs. So something I didn't mention before, or maybe I hinted at it, is that the ggplot is sort of like a global function. So anything you put in that first function is going to be applied to everything below, right? But we can, is it running it again?
I just went to go like new.
We're going to have to troubleshoot that after. I don't think it's going to get working. Up to you. You just want to follow along here, and then afterwards you can go through and sort that out. I think we'll fix it. It'll be fine. So everything like in the ggplot function is applied to the GMs below, but maybe it doesn't make sense to have color applied to both the lines and the plots. So we can actually take this out up here, and we could just drop it in the GM lines because we just want the lines colored by consonant. We don't want the points. And so what we can do, we can add an aesthetic function within here. We can pop our color in there, get rid of the color. And now the color will just be applied to the lines, and we can see that the points are now in black. I should also point out that the ordering of geomes is important. And so like I said early on, ggplot is sort of this layering program, and so everything is layered on top of each other, right? And it's sort of subsequent as you go down the page. And so we can just swap these orders around. It'll become very clear what ggplot is doing. And so now we have geome point coming first, and so it's on the bottom layer relative to geome line. Yeah, makes sense? Cool. All right, so we have another challenge. And for the next challenge, I want you to modify the above example. So you can just copy and paste it again. So that the size of the points are indicative of population size. So using a similar principle to the color, I want you to change the size and by the population variable. Yeah, sorry. Size of the points. Do you want to have a crack on here?
Doing it in my head.
Doing it in your head?
I think I know where
Oh, don't ruin it for everyone.
I'm not. Wait, what was the question?
Hey. So slow, man. No, I'm joking. That's right. It's good to maintain focus during these workshops so you don't fall behind.
Hey, at least the computer works.
That's right. While Max is trying to do it, what do you think it is? You want to try and put it in here?
Sure. Roll it up in here. So what am I doing? What are we changing the size of?
Population.
Is it just pop?
I don't know, is it?
I don't know. How do I scroll back up?
Your finger scroll. Or you can just click on the gapminder data set.
Oh, yeah.
Have a look at it.
I didn't want.
No, it worked. See?
Oh.
It worked. And it is possibly one of the ugliest plots I've ever seen.
Hey.
But that's
beautiful.
okay. It's hard to derive a lot of meaning from it, but that's okay. How's it going, Max? Yep. Cool beans. So I'm not going to dwell on this too long because this part could get a bit long. But what I am just going to touch on is that you can see these values here are not really interpretable, right? You need this math in your head. So just so you're aware, you can actually, people like you, you can actually manipulate the variables within the ggplot or within the gm function so that it changes the values in here. And later on, we'll go through changing the labels and you'll see how this can, make a lot more sense. So you can divide it or multiply it or whatever, square root it, do whatever you want. So, you can make it 25 million, or I don't even know what it is, so 25 or 250 million, et cetera, just to make it more readable. But again, we don't need to dwell on this. You don't need to really understand it. I think a good thing maybe with these workshops is that you're not going to remember everything, but when you remember that you can do something, you can then go Google it later, which is like what I do every day of my life. So yeah, just be aware of that. And then we have another challenge straight away. So modify the above example so that all the lines are blue. You think you know?
We're making it blue.
Yep. Blue is not red. Well, red is for you as well.
What black magic is this?
Okay, so there's a little concept that I didn't really describe earlier, so it's probably my fault. Did you get it, Max?
No, mine should have gone.
That's good. So it should shoot itself to an extent. So something I didn't talk about earlier is this sort of aesthetic function. And so within the aesthetic, the arguments within here are applied to a specific variable. And so we don't want to apply a color to a specific variable. We want to apply a color to the entire color, right? And so we're going to remove this aesthetic.
Oh.
And then we now have every line blue. What is yours full by, Max?
Oh, you got to put it in.
In bunnies? Is that quotation?
I did. I took away.
She understands. Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for your input. Cool. All right. You still have multiple colors? Did you just add a layer and you're not? That's all right. Plus blue. Yeah. Nice. Bit messed up. That's all good. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is transformations and statistics. So ggplot's pretty cool and powerful in that, we can manipulate it several ways, essentially. And so the first thing we're going to look at is transforming our data. So I'm going to steal that plot from earlier on, which was GDP versus life expectancy. Run that again. And so from this plot, it looks like there may be some sort of relationship, but it's hard to visualize that. And I think most of us are probably aware of what a log transformation is. And so ggplot has all these scale functions, which allow you to manipulate the plots even further, which is super handy. And one of those is to scale, or change the scales really, the axis by log 10. I think there's like a square root and things as well. But today we'll stick with just this one. And so that it changes the x-axis, right? It's essentially just manipulating the data that you're applying to the plot. Pretty straightforward. Pretty simple. Come on, Ashton, well, when you not joking today. That's okay. Cool. So I think, again, this is another thing where you might not remember exactly how to do this, but just being aware is good because you can Google it later. You can search for it. Google is going to be your friend. And you might need Google for this next one. Okay, so the next challenge is to modify the same example, but so that the points are transparent. You're allowed to Google as well. Remember, Google is your friend. Pardon? Yeah. Like you don't want to, you want to see some of it, like some level of transparency. Let's say 50%.
That transparent? Is that what you mean? This is 0.5.
Yeah. Didn't improve it as much as I thought it would. Oh yeah, there you go. The guy teaching it. Whoa, yeah, that's right though. It's not 50%, but you know.
You wanted it 50.
That's right, you can put it whatever. So you can adjust that value, whatever suits yours best. But I guess the point is that when you have lots of overlapping points, like we do here,
You wanted it transparent.
well, that is not funny.
It's invisible.
But it's a very good demonstration of the power of ggplot, right?
That wasn't quite.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess I mean, here you still see a lot of overlapping with sort of black sort of globules, but it really makes sense. It's really powerful. Yep.
I lost your screen share.
Ah,
Still sharing your screen?
no, it's gone.
Now I'm breaking his computer.
Thanks, Wytamma.
Cheers.
It is.
Sorry.
That's right. So when we have a lot of like points on the plot, they can overlay in these black globules, and you can't really see how many plots are actually falling at that point. So there are other ways you can do this as well, like better represent the distribution of plots on the graph. But I think when you have a lot of overlaying plots like points like this, it makes sense to use something like alpha. There is something else called geom jitter, which we won't go into today. But again, another thing to be aware of. All right. You can do it a lot. We're not going into that today. There's not a Star Wars thing. There is a Wes Anderson color scheme if you ever want to use that, and you can download those and use those codes to color your plots like Wes Anderson films. And I've done it, and I really like it. And that's what I was doing instead of doing my PhD, which is why I'm not finished yet. And so what we're going to do next is fit a statistical relationship or a line of best fit through this. All right. I'm going to check the chat. Well, I'm not. Yeah, thanks, Gabe. How's yours going, man? So there's another geom. Actually, does anyone want to guess what the geom is called? Oh, you all failed. Smooth.
Oh, that was what I was.
Get over it. That's why it is fun. Yeah, do that kind of stuff. You're going to learn a lot when you just play around with things like that. So geom smooth, right? And what does it do? Makes a really ugly plot, but it just sort of assumes our method, which is gamma. And so what we're going to do, yeah, it's perfect, right? But we can tell what method to use. Then we're going to use this linear method. And now we see this beautiful, cool line of best fit going through there that represents the relationship between these two variables. You can see there's like this blue line that represents what we think the relationship is, but then there's also this shaded area around it, and that represents, I'm pretty sure, the standard error, and I'm going to check. I will show you. Well, I wasn't going to show you, but I do have the what you need to be aware of to find it. It's a bit of a mess around. Like to get it on there, it's pretty automated and awesome, but to move it around the plot is a pain in the ass. So we won't do that today. But just okay. So yeah, the grey represents the standard error. All right. So what we can do now, like you can manipulate these lines as well. My computer is shooting itself. All right. And so there's so there's other arguments we can apply to this geom smooth to change the thickness. It's not a challenge, but seeing as we're going to run for time, we'll do it. Make it a challenge. Can anybody figure out how to change the thickness of the line? No, when I was going through this, I wrote the exact same thing, so it's okay. I also had to search it. The next most logical thing is what it is. Yeah, the next most logical thing after that. No? Nobody? Didn't quite get there? That's right, it's on the screen. It's a bit thick. That's not really helpful when it's that thick. Can't really see the standard error or anything, but that's right. So we can, let's just downsize that a little bit. And it's thick. Cool. And so Kat was asking about how to add the equation to the plots. And you need to use a package ggplot2 and this function here. I can't remember the arguments off the top of my head. I wasn't going to go through it today because, like I said, it gets a bit convoluted when you want to move it around the plot. And it really actually wasn't even in the workshop. But I think it's just another one of those things to be aware of. You can go Google it later and use it. If you want to write it down, it's super handy. So the package is ggplot2, function is stat reg line equation. Oh, it's a challenge again. Okay. Yeah, but it's been a while since I went through it.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just super excited by my own work. Modify the above example so that the continents are represented by both different shapes and colors. Okay. Cool. No,
Every kind of continent.
see how they write it. Yeah. No.
And what else are we doing? Color. Colors? The color?
No, ignore that. Just the function. So I was just trying to be smart and assume that he knows what you want. Give it a crack.
No.
No. Can you guess what you did wrong there? Because remember, we're applying it to specific variables, so we need to nest it within like a function.
Is that what we're doing?
One more bracket.
Oh, I thought I did that.
That's right. So if you have it before and you got to write a bracket, it just it doesn't write. Yeah, boom. There you go. Super pretty plot. And so actually you did it differently. I know you're saying. Yeah. You got rid of the line and you applied like the color in the ggplot level. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I was just, so if you have another gem, just remember that you'd apply it to multiple gems, but I think with gem line. Yeah. How you going, Max?
Right.
Oh, fuck, guys. Top of the class, my ass.
Why?
Why? Maybe it's X. So it's trying, Max is just trying to solve it, everyone. Why brackets? On which part? Did you remove Jan Smooth? And your line has disappeared. You got it? I just want to check, make sure. Yeah, sweet. Good stuff. Good work, everybody. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, we got 15 minutes, we're going to do multi-panel figures. Yeah, shit is right, Max. So the first thing we're going to do here, just because the gap-minded data set is quite big, is we're going to subset the data. And there's two ways we can do this. One, we haven't really been through on how to do it, but I just like it so much better that I'm going to show you that as well and show you why it's more powerful to do it that way. Okay. But I think someone else will be giving a seminar on something similar later on. But we'll do the sort of the base way of doing things, which is kind of ugly. All right. Everybody remember that from a few weeks back?
Why 2 equals again?
Because single equals is like assigning. So it's got a different, you know. Cool. So we now have this Americas. That's
Yeah, right.
why? Because everybody likes America. Different color. Yeah, you need a comma after it because we want to represent, it's representing the column. So we're going to do before the comma is column and then after. Oh no, oh wait. Anyway, so that's one way of doing things, right? Sort of base way. But I'm going to show you another way, which again, you don't need to completely understand this. Is just to show you that you can do this and you can Google it later. And in the coming weeks, we'll learn a bit more about the tidyverse and dplyr and all that kind of stuff. But another way of doing it is to take this gapminder data set. We use this thing called a pipe. And a pipe really is just taking whatever comes before and putting it into whatever comes after. That's the simplest way of saying this. And then within the tidyverse, we have this cool function from dplyr called a filter, right? We're going to filter. This is why I like it. Super logical, syntax makes sense. The gapminder data set by the Americas. So it's super readable, super simple. You don't need a comma.
Should it be continent? Or do you filter? How does it know it's Americas?
Oh, yeah, thank you. It's sort of filtering the continent by, right? You filter by where the continent equals
So we don't
Americas.
need to go gapminder or
Nope. So this is something, again, don't worry too much about this, but it's just giving you, a bit of insight into what's coming. I thought Kevin might appreciate this while I included it. So that is a pipe. And so essentially what they're doing, it's, as the name suggests, a pipe, it's taking something from one place to another. So we're taking the gapminder's data set and we're passing it to the filter function. That's it. Like here, it seems super simple, like maybe unnecessary, but you'll start to see when you start to string multiple things together that a pipe is really powerful. And I'll actually show you that in an example in a second. You're welcome, Kevin. And so what did we want to apply? So we're going to take this ggplot. And take the Americas data set.
the new one?
Yep. Yeah, I can see the GM line. And then this is the last step. So this is how we make a multi-panel figure, at least one way to do it, where you can use this thing called facet. We're going to use a facet wrap. And then we're going to tell it, using this little squiggly line, what we want it to split the grid or make, I don't know how I would say that. What we want the individual plots to represent, essentially, right? What we want to facet it by. In this context, we want to do it like that. And we end up with this bad boy. How'd you go? You got an error? It's okay. Cool. How'd it go? Cool.
I was like, I didn't understand what yeah.
So we're actually going to add another little thing to this, just because we can't actually read the years down here. Well, maybe if you make this a lot bigger and wider, like extend it, you'll be fine. Oh, okay, it was a joke. Cool. We're going to change. We're going to use this theme function, and that's to change the axis text. Yeah, and I actually can't remember exactly how to do this. Text X. I can't remember. 45. I got a cheat sheet. Change the angle. I don't remember. I got a cheat sheet. Go on. This is my life, everyone. Just so you're well aware. Element text. There we go. And hopefully now we can read this a little bit better, right? And you can manipulate that angle, right, to whatever you want. Change it to 90. Cool. And our theme is a pretty powerful function. You can manipulate a lot of different things on there. You can, obviously the y-axis and then the ticks and all this other stuff. I would, again, it's another thing you should play around with. We're not going to go through everything today, especially because we have like 5 minutes left. The last thing I'm going to do, yeah. Go.
So I was just wondering what does that squiggly line mean? So is it like the tilde? Like by okay.
By, there you go.
So but it's not the same syntax as like in a linear model or something like that. I guess. Okay.
There you go.
And so is that a shortcut or
like as in can you use by instead? Is that what you're asking?
yeah.
Potentially.
I think it's mostly useful for facet grid when you have to just specify rows and columns for facet grid. So you put one on the left or right hand side of that squiggly line or tilde.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more useful there. I think you can do it possibly without in facet wrap, but yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Thanks, Gav. All right. So there are a few more things, but we can save that for the next time. So we didn't quite get to it. The last thing I'm going to show you is why I think this sort of tidyverse syntax is way better than this. So you can see here we have to make this sort of obviously we have to make this America's data set, and I would call this an intermediate object. Like when I initially started in my PhD, like I swear my first analysis had like 1 billion intermediate objects, and then your R project gets way too big and you have this just crap everywhere. And so I think one of the things that the tidyverse allows is that we can sort of bypass this by just piping things together, right? So we can, instead of making this intermediate object, we can take this tidyverse. So we can take our gap-minded data set, we can filter it, and then instead of creating in Americas, we can actually just pipe it directly into here. So we just remove the data. And so we're subsetting it. We're subsetting our data, right? We're filtering it, and then we're applying it, well, passing it straight into the ggplot function. And the pipe is smart in that it will, I guess, pipe the predecessor into the first argument of the next function, if that makes sense. So we don't need to write data or anything like that. If you want to put it somewhere else, we can discuss that another time and we'll get into that. But I just wanted to highlight the power of this. And yeah. And it's super useful because you don't have to make crappy intermediate objects. So we only have 4 minutes left. There are some other things like modifying text, exporting plots. I would go into tidy sort of plots, and then a final challenge. But we won't do that today. We can save it for next time. Instead, are there any questions? Or are you still trying to crack that one? Yeah. Yes, you can add a point. So you take the gap-minded data set, you're filtering that, and what comes out of that, you're piping it straight into your ggplot.
But my fingers are going on an angle.
So within element text, you have angle 45. All right. That should be all good.
Angel.
Not angel, angle. Okay. And that works? Cool beans. Okay. Well, any questions? You can go. It's all right. You're allowed. Dismissed. Shannon? Question? Good. Kat, question? No? Wytamma, question?
Yeah, how far off like a publication do you think that sort of those plots are? Like you have like 5 lines of code there for like a typical publication level plot. I guess it depends on your data set and stuff like that. Because I guess none of these are really like publication level. Do you find yourself having to do like a bunch of small manipulations to get to a data set, or would you like export it as a SVG and then do that in Illustrator or something, or how?
This is a good question.
You gotta get rid of that gray background. I hate that gray background.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I like for my plots in mine, I would say, yeah, the plots, like the lines of code are like triple this. Mate, it's like, it's stupid. But once you get it done once, right, I just regurgitate the same sort of themes and everything. And so it's pretty straightforward. So I think if you put in the time once, but I think there is a lot going into making it publication ready. And there are times where I've just done that and like dropped it into PowerPoint or something.
Yeah, and you'd say, and it's all sort of building on these, like those small like those principles that you sort of went over at the start of like the coordinate systems and the aesthetics.
Yeah.
There's no like extra little thing between that and the publication plot. It's more just like tweaking and applying like the aesthetics to get it right.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it's really just adding more and more layers, I would say. Like every once in a while, like if you want to add, like I was saying earlier, the equation, like you'll need to use like ggplot2 to add like the equation to like a